Hello, Agriscience. Let's go ahead and start today with forest management. There is nothing that is more peaceful than having a place where you can go in the woods and just watch things around you. And so I have to say that one of my favorite places to be is out amongst a bunch of trees, because it's relaxing and it's comforting to kind of feel those trees around you. There are a lot of different regions of forest in the United States, and one of the largest regions, as far as producing large amounts of pulpwood, which is what we're going to make paper out of, is the northern coniferous forest. So that's up in the northeast area, northeast part of the United States. So a lot of our paper making actually comes from the northeast part of the United States. So if you're fans of The Office like I am, it makes sense that Dunder Mifflin would actually be up in the northeastern part of the United States. Um, Another region, as far as forestry goes, is the Pacific Coast Forest. This is a much different type of forest region than what we have in our part of the world. A lot of what we have is pines. This is one of the most productive forest regions that we have, even though you don't really think about it that much, because, when I think about the West Coast, I think about lots of rain and I think about Starbucks coffee. But when you think about the Pacific Northwest, there are lots and lots of trees up there, some of the largest trees in the world. I mean, if you even think about things like the redwoods and the fact that you can literally build roads through the middle of redwood trees, um, they are going to be very large and plentiful trees out there. The Douglas fir, which we don't see a whole lot around here, is very prolific in the Pacific Coast area and is one of the most important trees that we have grown in the United States. So Douglas fir is going to be a very popular breed of tree out in the Pacific Northwest. Here, we have a lot of different types of trees. We have hardwood trees, we have softwood trees, um, we have a lot of trees that grow quickly. We have the climate for growing trees quickly, and we have certain trees that actually grow fairly well in our environment, and we use those for lumber as far as building things, and for pulpwood as far as making paper. Some of the most important ones that you're looking at in the southern forest in our area in particular are conifers. And so by conifer, I mean cone bearing trees, trees that actually will have some sort of cone on them. And they typically are also going to have needles on them versus a flattened blade of a leaf is what you're going to see with the hardwoods. And so a lot of times these conifers are also going to be evergreen, so they're not going to actually lose their leaves. You may see them shed needles, but they are typically not going to shed all their leaves at one time. Um, all of these here that we've got listed under the conifers, Virginia, loblolly, shortleaf, longleaf, and slash, all these are pines. We do have other types of conifers as well, but we are a very large pine producing state, and loblolly is going to be our state tree. We produce lots of loblolly pine in the state of North Carolina. They grow quickly and they grow well in our environment. Some of the more popular hardwoods, you've got oaks. We have a tremendous amount of oaks, and there are lots of different types of oaks. And these are going to produce acorns, so that's one way to help to identify different types of oaks, is if they have an acorn, then it is an oak. Poplars, we have lots of poplars in this area. A very, very prolific area as far as poplars. They grow quickly and they grow easily, and they seed easily. So lots of poplars in our area, lots of different types of maples. A lot of times we use maples for decorative purposes, landscape purposes, aesthetic purposes in our part of the United States. But if you go up into the northeastern part of the United States, they're actually using those maples to produce things like syrup, and then walnuts. And the walnut tree, we do have quite a few around this area, and of course those are a fruit bearing tree, so you actually can get some of the walnut fruit off of that. The importance of forest, there's a lot of different reasons why we need forest. There's a lot of different reasons why things like the wildfires out in the western part of the United States are so dangerous, because these forests are important for not just things like recreation, and yes, it does give us an opportunity to get away from the real world every once in a while, to get out into the woods. And so recreation is a good thing. But there's a lot of other things that are even more important as far as woods go. Yes, wood products to build things with, but wildlife habitat, having to have somewhere where animals can actually live and survive and find food and find shelter. Um, Really important, as these wildfires are happening out in the western part of the United States. A lot of wildlife is being displaced, so they don't have anywhere to live anymore. It also is a huge filter for us. As we breathe out carbon dioxide, it has to go somewhere. We can't breathe it back in. We have to have some way to transfer it back to something that we can breathe in. And so the way that it works is we breathe that carbon dioxide out, the trees are going to take it. The trees are going to make something functional out of it. They're going to make a food for themselves out of it. And as they make that food for themselves, their byproduct, the product that just happens to be given off during that process, is oxygen, and we just happen to need it. So forests are extremely important, not just for the fun aspect of things, but also the fact that we need it in order to be able to survive. One term you need to be familiar with is the term silviculture, and silviculture is just the scientific forest management techniques. This is what we're using in order to be able to manage a forest, managing the growing timber itself. Sometimes we have to do things that seem a little strange in order to make sure that forests are growing the way that they ought to. When we're managing timber, sometimes we need to do things like thin trees out. With prescribed thinning, you actually are going through and you're taking out trees that are taking the resources away from the trees that need them. It's kind of like, yeah, I hate to say it's survival of the fittest, but it is kind of like survival of the fittest. If you have a little weed tree that's taking up resources and space for a tree that's going to, potentially be a harvester for lumber one day, then you really need to make sure that you are not choking that tree out with those little weed trees. And so sometimes you have to go in and thin, and take things out of there in order to make sure that everybody's got enough room to grow. Carrying capacity doesn't just refer to animals. Carrying capacity also can refer to plants too. Too many plants in one area cannot all share the same resources. One other way that you can do that is prescribed burning. And this sounds a little strange, but whenever I was in college, I took a forestry class. And with that forestry class, one thing we had to do was a prescribed burn. And essentially, we we went around the edge of a forested area with a drip torch, which is more or less a um, torch that has some sort of a fuel in it, and it's actually lit on fire, and you're dripping that fuel as you walk around the edge of the forest, and you're burning inward. You're not actually burning and killing the trees that are in there, but you are burning the litter layer. And as you burn the litter layer, then it helps to eliminate the danger of wildfires. One of the reasons why we have so many issues with wildfires in the western part of the United States right now is because the forest management practices have not been put into place. You've got the federal government that's blaming it on the state government when it's actually federal lands, and so it's not being managed. And some prescribed burns where you actually have people who are watching and making sure that the process is under control could have saved a bunch of these wildfires. Um, Silviculture is also important, and it's part of harvesting timber. timber. There's a couple of different ways to actually harvest timber. Sometimes you will see people clear cut. If they clear cut, then they take everything and they are taking that from being a forest to not being a forest. So clear cutting is a system where you harvest trees and you take all the trees. Sometimes you might want to just take all the hardwood trees, or you might want to just take all of the coniferous trees, or you might want to take all the trees of a certain age. That's called selection cutting. And so selection cutting is going to be where you're only harvesting a certain amount and you're picking and choosing what you actually harvest. It is important, if you do harvest trees, to make sure that you are putting something back. Yes, it does cost money. It costs in order to be able to reseed. It costs in order to be able to replant. But it is important to leave those trees for future generations. And so it's a surefire method of making sure that you have those forests available in the future. Natural seeding obviously is going to be the least expensive because you're just allowing the trees to drop their seeds, and whatever comes up comes up. But there are some people that actually will go to a forestry nursery and they will pick up trees and they will actually plant a forest the way that they want it to be. A couple of pictures here. This is just a deciduous forest, and we'll look at a coniferous forest in a few minutes. This time of year, those of you who are in cohort A, we are losing the leaves on our trees in cohort A right now because we are entering the end of September, early October time frame, and so we're losing the leaves. These leaves are falling off, and the trees are basically going to go dormant for the winter. And some of the deciduous trees that we have in this area, and some of the ones that we use for certain types of things, are listed on this slide. Ash is typically going to be made into baseball bats. They're typically made into handles, like handles for rakes and hoes and stuff like that, so that they are tough. And I will show you a picture of some ash leaves in just a second. They're what we call opposite pinnately compound, and so I'll explain that when we get there. White oak is typically used for flooring and furniture. Red maple is typically going to be used for lumber. Veneer just means if something has a veneer on it, it might mean that it's, inexpensive on the inside, but it has a pretty covering on the outside. And so that pretty covering on the outside is the veneer. It makes it look more expensive than it actually is. So your red maple typically is going to be a veneer. And we have a couple of pictures of some leaves here. This is a picture of that white ash leaves, and what it means to be pinnately compound means that you have got this is not a leaf, this is not a leaf. The whole leaf of the ash is this right here. This whole thing, because anytime you want to look at a leaf, you want to go all the way back to the bud to determine whether it is a simple leaf or a compound leaf. And a compound leaf will have leaflets, and these are leaflets that are coming out that are opposite each other. So they're directly across from one another, so they're oppositely pinnately compound. And so this is your whole leaf here and not just a leaflet. I'm not really sure why the river birch is in there. It's probably something I need to edit out at this point, but we do have a lot of river birches in the area. They typically grow near streams and rivers. Here's a picture of a coniferous forest. This is typically going to be your evergreen. You can see that there's going to be some snow on the ground here, and most of the time you're not going to see snow on the ground whenever you see a deciduous forest. Some of the important tree species in North Carolina that are conifers, you've got some of these softwoods. You've got Fraser firs. These are going to be your Christmas trees typically. And so I'll show you a picture of a Fraser fir in just a few minutes, but these are really common in the Christmas tree industry. Loblolly pines, just because that is our state tree, we can grow them, we can turn them into lumber, and these are super prolific in our area. They grow really easily and really fast. And then longleaf pine, not a lot of longleaf pines in the western part of the state. This is more of an eastern part of the state thing. You got your loblolly pine here, very common, especially from the Piedmont East. So that loblolly pine is going to be pretty popular and easily grown. Douglas fir, we mentioned a while ago. Not a lot of Douglas firs in this part of the country, but that is one of those that was in the Pacific Northwest. That is another conifer, though, and it's extremely important as far as the lumber industry. Lots of that in the Pacific Northwest. And then there is a really grainy picture. I really need to come in and fix some pictures. A really grainy picture of a Fraser fir right there on a Christmas tree farm in the western part of the state. So as far as different types of trees and the purposes behind different types of trees, there's a lot of different reasons that we use a lot of these different types of lumber for things. The next thing we're going to take a look at is the measurement of trees. Now, because a lot of you are fully remote, there's not going to be any way for me to actually get you outside to measure trees. I'm going to include on this page a couple of videos that show how to measure trees, because I think it will be easier for you to actually watch the videos of people actually measuring trees than me to try to explain it to you. Whenever we are measuring trees, we're going to look at a couple of different things. Pulpwood is typically going to be measured at a place called diameter at breast height, which is about 4.5 feet. Which is that DBH, and we're going to measure that in feet, and you're going to get a certain number of cords, and cords is the measurement for pulpwood, and pulpwood is typically going to be ground down into something else, normally paper. Saw timber is also measured at DBH, diameter at breast height, around 4.5 feet, and instead of being measured in cords, because you're not going to chop this one up. You want to use this one for lumber. It's actually going to be measured in 16-foot logs, and we say that it has a certain number of board feet in it. A board foot is 144 cubic inches. Now there's just some plywood there. It's just different sheets that are actually glued together. This is what I mean by diameter at breast height. Really not a good way for me to explain this over a video, but I'm going to show you a video. We use a Biltmore stick to actually read that diameter, and we use a Biltmore stick to measure the tree as well. So the tool that we'll actually be using as far as measurement is a Biltmore stick. And I'm actually going to skip the calculating board feet at the end of this, because that's not necessarily something that you'll have to do. But you can go and look at the PowerPoint if that's something that you're interested in. There is a formula there for calculating board feet. But make sure that you check out the other videos where they're going to show you step by step just how to actually measure trees. Until next time we'll be looking at some tools that are used in environmental science. This has been kind of a quick lesson on forestry. Hopefully those of you who are in cohort A and B will have an opportunity to actually get out and see some trees and do some work with the trees around here. So until next time, take care.